Hi, I'm Michelle Roos Goodrum, and I'm here today with Gary Ball Kilbourne. We're going to talk to you. We're just going to have a nice little conversation about research questions and research plans. So, Gary, this is a really important topic. What are your thoughts on where we begin planning research?
Well, it's just so important to actually plan our research as we start out. I can't help but remember something that my college roommate used to say a lot, and that was that prior planning prevents poor performance. And it seems to me that if you want a project to fail, then you just don't bother planning. You just go at the various search engines you might have and do a lot of ad hoc searches, but it's much more effective and efficient if you do plan, and you have to start with a research question. It's just a matter of making sure that you know what you want to find, and you know for whom you want to find it, and be very clear about both. And with the person that you're researching, you want to be able to anchor them as a unique individual in the history of the world somehow, and that usually involves a date and an event, a place, and maybe some relationships you already know about, but you want to know where you're going to start. That's one reason why having a well-framed research question is so essential. That if it, if your research question is too broad or too narrow, you won't be able to sort out that background information well. And you won't really have a good idea of where you want to try to end up, what kind of information, what kind of answer are you looking for?
I always like to think of the four W's: the who are you looking for, what are you looking for, when are you looking for it, and where. Just, like you said, and just make sure that as I'm developing my research question, that I kind of include all that information in it, so that it makes the question clearer and it helps keep you focused.
And by doing that also, it means that you have some sort of starting point information. And sometimes you just simply have to verify that that information is accurate. That may be your first thing you do as far as planning out. How are you going to make sure that you already have the basic information about your target individual, that all of that's accurate? So that is a place to begin.
And sometimes we don't sometimes we have lots of information about the person that we're looking for, and sometimes we don't have very much, like you say, and you have to at least get some basic information about them. But sometimes you have to really sort through. You have a lot of information, kinda sort through that and see what applies to your research question and, put it all together that way so that you've got a good solid background on them. And I also think that we need to, before we, really get too far into this, we have to understand what sources are available for the time and place that we're researching. Sometimes we might be trying to answer a question for which there are no records in that time and place, and if we don't have, a good background on them, that makes it a lot more difficult to figure out where to begin doing the research.
Yeah, it's almost a whole nother topic, but working on at least an initial locality guide for the place that you're dealing with. And indeed, you can narrow it down to a particular time. You don't have to do the whole history and all of the current background, everything of a location. But still, it's very important to know the territory, to know, where it is, what sort of jurisdictions it's been part of, because we know that county lines change, state lines change for that matter, if you're doing American research. There are different places that you might have to look in order to find the records that you want. And also, as you do that sort of locality guide, you become aware of repositories that are important for those sources you want. Not everything is going to be on Family Search or Ancestry. But having said that, the Family Search Wiki and catalog are great places to start trying to figure out what's available for the time and place that you're researching.
I like to think of that as, pre-planning. We haven't started the research yet, we don't have our research plan, we're doing pre-planning. To figure out what's available. And then once we've figured that out, then we can actually start building a plan. When it comes to plans, I always like to be really specific in the things that I put in my research plan. And then once, I kind of have a bunch of sources that I want to look at, and you have to kind of step back and think about being efficient, especially if you're doing client research because somebody's paying you for your time. But even if you're doing personal research, you want to start with, the best sources that are going to help you get to your answer, as opposed to, something else that may or may not help you. How do you go about, initially developing your research plans?
Well, it some of it has to do with what sort of questions, what question it is that you really are looking for. Right now, I've got a client project, for example, where one of the things they want me to do is to be able to connect generations, parent-child. They also are very interested in getting the basic birth, marriage, and death dates. We're already in the territory of multiple research questions. So you have to sort of break it down into separate plans to try to get through all of that. Some of it can be taken care of at the same time, of course, but in this particular project that I'm thinking of for the parent-child relationship among and I'm talking right now about 18th century and early 19th century that I'm looking at. It's before the time of a lot of the civil vital records. Probate, wills, and land records are really what I'm looking at first. But rather than just put my plan, yeah, I've got to look at the land records for such and such a county, I'll go into the Family Search Wiki and see what is available. And then, I look to see if, say, the courthouse indeed has all the records or whether some have been destroyed over time or lost. And I'll also check the Family Search catalog because that's a wonderful resource for finding out what they do have online. Some, but not all, overlaps with what's on Ancestry. But it also will give me an idea of whether I have to check out some of the brick and mortar repositories for the sort of project that I'm thinking of in this case. I'll actually check out what, say, Family Search has, and instead of putting just generalized land records, I'll put down at least what the film number and yeah, I can't really get into what the images are yet, but I'll even try to, keep a link directly to that particular source in my research plan. It saves a whole lot of time. It also saves time as I'm collecting those repositories that I might have to contact with email or phone or in some cases, maybe even go visit in person. It helps to have that contact information in my research plan. Again, it saves time.
Absolutely. And, sometimes, we get into, the first item or two of our plans, and then we realize that, maybe steps 3 and 4 we don't need to do, or maybe we need to skip to something else. So we always have to remember that our plans are dynamic, that sometimes they change. And I don't like to make big, long research plans for that reason because, I may go off in a completely different direction after I look at the first couple of items that are on my list. And I may realize that, the third item, it doesn't even apply anymore. So, I always have to remember research plans are dynamic and keep my research plan short and always be prepared to go off in a different direction depending on what I find.
We do discover different leads as we do the research. Just earlier this afternoon, I was looking at a deed, that does give a lot of help as far as relationships. Father, son, and brothers are all mentioned specifically in this deed, but it also includes a recitation of a lot of those land transfers within the family, and he even gives me the Liber and folios for where to find those earlier deeds, so I know that those have to go in my research plan now.
Yeah, absolutely, and so you can just insert those in, and you're off and running. You don't necessarily have to worry about what was next on your list, or at least maybe not immediately.
And then, yet at the top of my research plan list, there's the research question, which helps keep me from going down those rabbit holes,
Yes, yes.
and helps me keep my work efficient, and means that I'm also not going to waste my time or my client's money. And really, I should put it on my time rather than the client's money if I'm going to be pursuing something that just looks interesting but doesn't really bear on that research question.
One of the things I like to do, is I might take a sticky note and just put it up in the corner of my screen to remind me, this is my research question. And so when I find something else that's interesting, but doesn't apply, then I just kind of remember, don't go down the rabbit hole. Just add this item off on a separate list to look at on some other day, so that I can stay focused. But sometimes we're trying to do reasonably exhaustive research, and we do all this research, and then we just finally realize, we have exhausted all of the sources that we, have can find, and we're just not getting an answer to our question. And sometimes we have to, I don't want to say admit defeat, but maybe we need to terminate the research plan and just admit that at least right now, we can't satisfy the genealogical proof standard.
Yes, and that's exactly it. We might have to say that we simply have not met the GPS's time. Client work also usually has a limitation on the number of hours we can put into it, as well as some limitations as far as expenses. We might not be able to travel to that brick and mortar repository. We might not be able to order all the records that we want from other sources. But we have to admit that. We have to be clear about that with our clients. We need to be clear about it with ourselves, that this is all that we can do on this particular project, and say enough is enough.
Time to move on. So yeah, so we always want to make sure we have a good solid research question when we start out, and make sure that we've got, our background information down, we've done our pre-planning, and put together a research plan that's got specific tasks, I'll say, for it, and be mindful that we might be changing our plan as we go and not even looking at some of our sources because we come up with new sources that we should look at that are better. And like you say, eventually, sometimes for, either because of client limitations or because we've exhausted everything, that we need to terminate the plan, at least for the time being. I want to thank everybody for watching today, and I especially want to thank Gary for joining us. If you like what BCG is showing you, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thanks again.